My sister announced I was bankrupt right in front of 40 relatives, but I didn't even blink because I had just bought her dream house in cash. My name is Savannah Miller, and I let her humiliate me that day without a word. She stood in our parents' backyard, voice trembling with fake concern, telling everyone how I'd lost my business, my savings, my future. I watched her performance like it was a show because I knew what was waiting in my purse: a deed, a key, and a perfect view from the porch of a house she'd been dreaming about for years. You see, Haley had always needed to win. The spotlight, the praise, the envy, she collected those like trophies. But when life handed me a quiet chance to rewrite the script, I didn't shout. I smiled. She thought she won, but I was playing a different game. And when I invited her to meet the new owner, she had no idea she was walking straight into a story she didn't control. Let her brag, let them whisper. I was holding the real headline. Growing up, I used to believe Haley was magic. We'd share bunk beds in our suburban Ohio home, me on the bottom, her on the top, and every night before bed, she'd tell me stories she made up. In her voice, the world was brighter, the future exciting. I adored her. Back then, I didn't see the competition. I only saw my big sister. Our parents were loving but stretched thin. Mom was a school nurse. Dad worked nights at the local power plant. Haley, 2 years older, naturally became my protector, my entertainer, my favorite person. She taught me how to tie my laces, how to stand up to bullies, even helped me with math homework when I cried over long division. In middle school, she let me borrow her clothes when I had my first presentation. In high school, when I didn't make varsity cheer, she dragged me out for milkshakes and told me I'd shine in my own lane. When I got accepted to a small liberal arts college, she cheered the loudest, even helped me decorate my first dorm. Of those years, I gave her everything I had: time, attention, loyalty. When she had a rough breakup at 21, I skipped a midterm to drive 6 hours and hold her as she cried. When she flunked her first semester of college, I wrote her a 4-page letter reminding her of every strength she had. When our grandmother died, I held her hand at the funeral, even though I was the one who'd found grandma that morning. Looking back now, I realize I did all that not just out of love, but out of this desperate hope that if I kept giving, she'd never turn into the person I feared she might become: jealous, cruel, entitled. Because the seeds were always there. She loved attention, needed praise like oxygen. When we were kids, she'd get upset if I got a better grade. As teens, she once rewrote a short story I'd submitted to a local contest and sent it under her name. I didn't say anything when she won. I thought, what's the harm? She just wants to feel special. There was always an excuse. She's going through a hard time. She didn't mean it like that. You're more grounded. Just let it go. Our parents adored us both, but the truth was, Haley was exhausting and I was easy. They gave her more slack, more attention, because she made more noise. I understood that. I even justified it. I told myself I didn't need the spotlight. I was the solid one, the fixer, the quiet achiever. So I stayed in the background, built my little dreams, took pride in being consistent. And when Haley struggled through job after job, relationship after relationship, I was always there. Never had to ask. When she moved back in with our parents at 27, I helped her paint her new room. When she forgot my birthday for the 3rd year in a row, I still bought her a spa voucher. When she asked to borrow $2,000, 0 cents for a certification course, I wired it within an hour. And even though that money was never paid back, I convinced myself it didn't matter because I loved her. And I believed that one day, she'd see it. She'd see me. It wasn't just emotional support either. Like in our 20s, when I started working in marketing and she dabbled in modeling, I built her portfolio website. I edited her photos, wrote her bios, sent out her info to agencies. She'd thank me with a quick text and then disappear for weeks. And I kept hoping, kept thinking maybe this time she'd call on my birthday or ask how my work was going. Maybe she'd remember that I had dreams too. When I launched my own eco-friendly skincare line at 29, I sent her the first full product set. She posted about it once, misspelled the brand name, and then started pitching her friend's line 2 weeks later. I said nothing. Again, that was my pattern: silence, excuses, and a heart that quietly hoped for validation that never came. But you know what the worst part was? It wasn't the forgotten birthdays or the unpaid debts or the way she never once visited my tiny studio apartment during those first exhausting years of building a business. It was that I kept telling myself this was love, that real love meant never keeping score, that if I just gave a little more, waited a little longer, she'd finally treat me like I mattered, not as a tool, not as a backup plan, but as her equal. I didn't realize I was wrong, not until everything fell apart. The shift didn't happen overnight. It crept in quietly, like fog, until I could no longer remember when exactly Haley had stopped treating me like her sister and started seeing me as competition. Maybe it was when I bought my first car, used, practical, paid in full, while she was still borrowing dad's truck. Maybe it was when my product line got picked up by a boutique in Chicago and she called it cute, with that flat smile that never reached her eyes. The signs were subtle at first, comments phrased as compliments. You look so professional in that outfit. I could never pull off something so plain. Or, it's amazing how well your little business is doing considering you never studied finance. I'd laugh it off, tell myself she didn't mean it that way. But the comments kept coming, and slowly they started to sting. At family dinner, she'd find ways to steer conversations back to herself. If dad asked about my latest client, she'd interrupt with a, "Wait till you hear what happened at my store today." When I shared that I'd been nominated for a local entrepreneurship award, she told everyone she'd been approached by a modeling scout on the street. The story changed every time she told it, but no one seemed to notice, only that her version was always more exciting, more glamorous than mine. She began asking for favors that didn't feel optional. "Can you rewrite my resume by Friday? It's for a management role. Your skincare line has a photographer, right? Can I borrow him for a shoot? Hey, your client's office is near that new restaurant. Can you pick up a gift card for me while you're there?" And always, there was the expectation of a yes. If I hesitated, her voice would go tight. "It's not that big of a deal, Savannah." Or worse, "God, I'd do it for you." Once she invited me to speak at her store's Women in Business night, then introduced me as my sister who sells soap on Etsy. I was stunned, not because of the simplification, but because of how many people laughed. I laughed too. What else could I do? She never asked about my wins, not really. When I got my first wholesale contract worth 5 figures, she texted back, "Cool." When I was featured in a podcast interview, she didn't listen. When I moved into my townhouse, small but fully mine, she walked through the rooms once and said, "I guess it's cozy." But when she got promoted from cashier to floor manager, we had to celebrate. I hosted the dinner. I told myself it was just her way, that she struggled to express support, that maybe she didn't realize. Then came the passive aggressive digs. "I wish I could just work from home in pajamas all day. Must be nice not having a real boss breathing down your neck." Being an entrepreneur sounds glamorous until you realize it means you're never off the clock. It was like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Little slashes that didn't bleed right away, but left bruises all the same. I noticed how often she borrowed my clothes and returned them stained, how she never paid for coffee even when she invited me out, how she introduced me to her friends as my baby sister, who's really into natural stuff. When I gently brought up any of it, she'd act shocked. You're so sensitive. Or worse, she'd cry, turning the moment into something where she was the victim. And then slowly I stopped bringing things up at all. I told myself boundaries were overreactions, that biting my tongue was maturity, that if I kept being kind, patient, forgiving, eventually she'd come around. I didn't see it for what it was. Not yet. Looking back, I think the moment that should have made everything clear was the night she threw herself a birthday party. She asked me to help with decorations, food, RSVPs, even handled her playlist. I spent 3 days organizing everything. Then, at the party, she introduced me to her friends as the best assistant ever. Not sister, not business owner, not even by name, just assistant. And when I froze, shocked, she just laughed and added, "She's so organized. I don't know how. She doesn't work for me full time." Everyone chuckled. I excused myself and cried in the bathroom. When I came back out, she was dancing with a glass of rosé, surrounded by compliments and cameras, as if nothing had happened. Realized then she didn't see me, not really. To her, I was a tool, a comparison, a contrast she used to highlight her version of success. Still, I wasn't ready to confront it. So I cleaned up after the party, like always, took the trash out, drove her home, and told myself maybe next year would be different. The day everything changed was supposed to be a celebration. It was our parents' 40th wedding anniversary, and the whole family had flown in. Cousins from Florida, uncles from Oregon, even Aunt Marlene from Nova Scotia. We hadn't had a reunion this big in years. Mom was glowing. Dad kept trying not to cry every time someone toasted them. And I was doing my best to keep my business crisis under wraps. A month earlier, my main supplier had gone under with zero warning. Orders backed up, customer complaints stacked higher than my inbox could handle, and sales were dipping fast. I'd managed to secure a short-term loan and was working night and day to restructure. It was stressful, but temporary. I had plans, solutions, but I didn't want to explain all that at a family barbecue. I especially didn't want Haley to know. And yet, when I caught her in my guest room 2 weeks before the reunion, claiming to be looking for a charger, I had a sinking feeling. She was rifling through papers on my desk, my laptop open nearby. I didn't accuse her. I didn't want to believe it. Should have. Because as we gathered under the white canopy tent Dad had borrowed from the firehouse, surrounded by grilled corn, laughter, and a slideshow of old family photos, Haley stood up and tapped her glass. And the moment I heard the ring of metal on glass, I knew. "Everyone," she said, her voice full of practiced emotion, "before we continue celebrating, I need to share something important." People hushed quickly. She looked at me across the crowd, eyes wide with theatrical sadness. "It's about Savannah." A nervous laugh rippled through the air. I sat frozen. "She hasn't told many of you yet, but I think it's time we support her the way family should." My stomach dropped. "It's Monty's business. It's bankrupt. She's filed Chapter 11. Gasps, murmurs. A few people actually looked at me like I might burst into tears. "She didn't want you to know," Bailey went on, "because she's proud. But she's lost her inventory, her cash reserves, everything. She's moving out of her townhouse next month." A few people turned toward me. My aunt clutched her chest. Someone said, "Oh my God." It wasn't true. Not all of it. Yes, things were hard, but bankruptcy? I hadn't filed anything. The documents she must have seen were legal drafts from my attorney, contingency paperwork. Worst case scenario. They hadn't even been signed. I stood slowly. "That's not accurate," I said, as calmly as I could. Haley rushed to my side like a stage actor missing her cue. "Don't deny it, Savvy. I found the papers. It's okay to admit it. I already offered to let you stay in my spare room." I felt the humiliation burn through me like acid. Her voice was syrupy sweet, a perfect performance. And the worst part? Most of them believed her. I looked at Mom, her eyes wide, confused. Dad looked at the grass like it might offer him answers. "I haven't filed anything," I said. "My business is going through changes, yes, but it's not bankrupt." Haley laid a gentle hand on my arm like she was comforting me. "She's in denial," she whispered, loudly enough for everyone to hear. I walked away. I walked straight into the house, locked the bathroom door, and leaned over the sink. My hands shook, not from the lie, but from the betrayal. My own sister had taken half understood legal paperwork and turned it into a family wide public humiliation. Not because she cared, because she wanted to win. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text from my realtor. "Offer accepted, closing date confirmed for Monday. Congratulations." It was the house, her house, the lakefront home she had gushed about for years. The one with wraparound windows and cedar paneling and a dock where she imagined sipping wine in the evenings. It had just gone back on the market. I'd made an all-cash offer using a shell LLC. She had no idea. I stared at that message like it was oxygen. She thought I was broken, finished. But in 48 hours, I'd hold the keys to everything she ever wanted. And she'd never see it coming. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. My lipstick had faded. My expression was tight, exhausted. But my eyes, they were clear, not crying, not breaking. I had been here before, not in this exact way, but in spirit. Every time she'd taken credit, every time she dismissed my work, every time she twisted a moment to make herself look better, kinder, more important, this was just the grandest version of what she'd always done. And I wasn't going to let it define me. I texted Emma, my best friend and financial advisor, who'd been helping me weather the business slowdown. Her response came quickly. "Let her gloat. Monday changes everything." Back outside, the air was thick with unspoken things. Haley had resumed chatting like nothing happened, accepting hugs and sympathetic nods as if she were the one grieving my downfall. My younger cousin even offered me his resume in case I was hiring for admin support. After I got back on my feet, I nodded politely, smiled, and locked it all away for later. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it. Her expression, that faux concern, the way Mom looked at me like I was a child who disappointed her. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was exposure, stripped bare in front of people I'd worked for years to earn respect from. But beneath the shame was something else. I pulled out the property folder and reviewed every detail again. The home inspection report, the title search, the final offer, and I realized something important. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my story. For the first time in years, I wasn't going to shrink so someone else could shine, not even my sister, especially not her. The next morning, I woke up in my childhood bedroom and stared at the ceiling fan spinning above me like it might have answers. All I felt was numb. The embarrassment from the day before clung to me like a damp coat. I could still hear Haley's voice echoing over the party, still see the looks on my relatives' faces, concern, pity, and worst of all, doubt. Was I overreacting? Maybe she was just trying to help. Maybe I had made things seem worse than they were. But no matter how I twisted it, the truth remained. She didn't ask. She didn't talk to me. She announced something deeply personal, partially false, and completely out of line in front of everyone who mattered. And she did it with a smile. I'd spent years absorbing small insults, minimizing her slights, swallowing my hurt to keep the peace. But this was too big to ignore. Still, I felt like I was falling apart. I couldn't eat breakfast. I couldn't look my parents in the eye. When mom asked how I was feeling, I mumbled something about being tired and locked myself in the upstairs bathroom again. That's where the panic hit hard. My heart raced, vision blurred, and for several minutes, I just sat on the floor, gripping my knees, trying to remember how to breathe. What if Haley was right? What if my business was failing? The supplier collapse had shaken everything. My inventory timeline was still a mess. Customer complaints were slowing down, but brand trust had taken a hit. I'd lost two big contracts already, and the holiday season, the make or break quarter, was fast approaching. What if this was it? What if everything I'd built was just one bad quarter away from collapse? What if I really was the joke she made me out to be? I thought about canceling the lake house offer. It was stupid, wasn't it? Flashy, reckless, something she would do. What kind of responsible business owner spends nearly $1 million while restructuring debt? Even if it was technically affordable, even if my financial advisor had signed off, it felt indulgent now, selfish. I picked up my phone and hovered over Emma's name. I wanted to call. I needed to hear someone say I wasn't crazy, but I was afraid she'd agree with me. That she'd say, maybe now's not the time for a vacation home. Instead, I texted, having doubts, maybe I made a mistake. Her reply came 10 minutes later. Let's talk in person. Don't spiral alone. So I didn't. I showered, dressed, drove to her office across town like a zombie. Emma didn't lecture me. She didn't sugarcoat anything either. You're not crazy, she said plainly. You're hurt, betrayed, but your business isn't dead. Your numbers are temporarily down, not gone. Your plan is solid. You're rebuilding slowly. I nodded. In the house? I asked. She sighed. Is it emotional? Yes. But is it irresponsible? No. You're allowed to make a powerful decision, even while hurting, especially if it helps you reclaim control. But it's her dream, I whispered. Then it's time to stop making your life small just so she can feel big. That broke something open. I cried in her office for 20 straight minutes. Not delicate tears, ugly, gasping, sobs. I cried for the years I'd let Haley's voice drown mine out, for the times I'd minimized myself to keep the peace, for the sister I'd loved and lost to jealousy. When I left, I felt lighter, still bruised, still angry, but clearer. Haley might have tried to define my story, but she didn't own the ending. That evening, I returned to my townhouse alone. It felt smaller somehow, like my confidence had been stripped away at the family reunion and left behind on my parents' lawn. I sat on the edge of my couch and stared at the boxes I still hadn't unpacked from my last restock attempt. Half labeled, half forgotten, just like how I felt. I made tea I didn't drink, turned on music I didn't hear. And I asked myself the hardest question of all. What if she never apologizes? What if Haley really believes she did the right thing? Could I live with that? Was this house, this future, this version of success really for me? Or had I built it all trying to prove something to someone who would never see it? That night, I wrote in my journal until my hand cramped. Every ugly thought, every raw moment, I let it pour out. I didn't try to spin it into empowerment. I didn't try to find the lesson yet. I just let myself feel it because healing doesn't start with answers. It starts with honesty. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself be honest with no filters, no performances, just Savannah. Hurt, but not finished, bent, but not broken. The next morning, I woke early, though I hadn't slept well. My eyes felt gritty from crying, but my body was oddly calm. I moved slowly through my morning routine, brushing my teeth, tying my hair back, making coffee. Each motion felt like reclaiming a little piece of myself. Today was the day. I checked my phone. The confirmation email from the real estate agent glowed back at me. 9:00 a.m. Final signing, bring ID. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I stood, walked to the bedroom closet, and pulled out my navy slacks and white button up shirt. Not flashy, not a power outfit, just neat, professional, me. As I dressed, I thought about what I'd say if anyone questioned my decision. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even about the house, really. It was about closing a loop, ending a cycle I'd been trapped in since childhood, the cycle of shrinking so Haley could shine. I drove the 2 hours to the real estate office in silence, the hum of the tires on the highway grounding me. No music, no podcast, just my thoughts, surprisingly steady. When I arrived, the office receptionist led me into a small conference room with beige walls and a glass table. The agent greeted me warmly. The paperwork was already laid out, page after page of legal print. My hand trembled slightly as I signed the first document, but by the fifth signature, I felt something shift. A quiet, determined. When I signed the last page and handed it back, the agent smiled and pushed a small envelope toward me. Congratulations, Miss Morgan. Here are your keys. Keys to a house, to a decision that was mine alone, to freedom. I walked out of the building and stood on the sidewalk, blinking in the morning sun. It felt. From there, I drove directly to the property. As I pulled into the circular driveway, the lake glittered beyond the trees, peaceful and wide. The house rose up in front of me like a promise I had finally kept to myself. It was even more beautiful than I remembered. Inside, everything smelled faintly of wood polish and possibility. I wandered through the room slowly, running my fingers along the banister, opening cabinets, peeking into closets. In the great room, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows and took a deep breath. This was mine. I was still rebuilding my business, still healing from the humiliation, but this was proof I hadn't lost everything, that I hadn't lost myself. After a while, I took out my phone and sent a single text to Haley. Meet me at the lake house, 1:45 p.m. Her reply came fast. Wait, what? Where? Whose house is this? I smiled faintly. Just put it in your GPS. See you soon. For the next hour, I made coffee, tidied the porch, and sat quietly with my thoughts. When her car finally pulled up, I was ready. Haley's arrival was everything I expected: confusion, then disbelief, then indignation. She demanded answers, still trying to control the narrative. But this time, I didn't flinch. I told her the truth about the house, the documents, and the damage she'd done. She tried to justify, to spin, to retreat into old patterns, and I let her for a moment. Then I told her, plainly and without venom, that the pattern ends here. She could be part of my life, but not if it meant undermining me to feel strong. Something broke open in her. A truth she'd hidden even from herself spilled out. Fear, debt, insecurity. And for the first time, instead of bracing myself against her, I listened. We talked for hours. She cried. I cried. We didn't solve everything, but we started That was the miracle. 2 weeks later, we invited the family to the lake house for a gathering, not to show off, not to brag, but to clear the air. Haley stood beside me and told them the truth, apologized, admitted her mistake. There were gasps, whispers, but also relief, forgiveness, not instant, but real. Afterward, as twilight fell over the lake and laughter rose from the fire pit, I looked around at the people who had once pitied me. They saw me differently now, not just as a business owner or the good sister, but as someone whole. I looked at Haley and saw not a rival, but a woman finally willing to grow. And I saw myself, not perfect, but powerful in a quiet, steady way. I had survived. No, more than that, I had risen, and the view from here was worth everything. As the sun began its slow descent, casting golden light across the lake, I realized something profound. This house wasn't just a symbol of triumph over Haley. It was a sanctuary, a place where I could begin again, not as a reaction to someone else, but on my own terms. That evening, I lit a fire in the stone hearth and wrapped myself in a blanket on the couch. The crackle of burning wood filled the space, and for the first time in weeks, I felt safe. Safe from judgment, safe from shame, and most importantly, safe from the echo of my sister's voice trying to define my worth. I picked up a journal, a leather-bound one I had meant to use months ago, and began to write, not about the betrayal or the pain, but about what I wanted moving forward, a vision for myself, for my business, for the kind of sisterhood I might still hope for. Each word I wrote felt like a step back to center, a declaration that my story was still mine to write. The next morning, I woke early again, not from anxiety this time, but from clarity. I walked down to the dock with my coffee, the mist still rising off the water. I sat at the edge, legs dangling over the lake, and watched the sun break through the horizon. This was healing. It wasn't flashy or loud. It didn't come with a dramatic confrontation or applause. It was quiet, slow, and deeply personal. I checked my messages. There were no emergencies, no new false narratives to correct, just a single text from Haley. Thank you for yesterday. I want to change. I just don't know how yet. I typed back, that's a start. Let's take it one step at a time. In the weeks that followed, I returned to the city part-time, restructured my team, hired new staff, and began piloting a more resilient supply chain model. Haley and I started weekly calls, awkward at first, but gradually more honest. We began a new kind of dialogue, one where we didn't compete, but confided. And every Friday I returned to the lake house, alone at first, then sometimes with Haley, then eventually with cousins, friends, even my parents. It became a place of reconnection, not just between people, but within ourselves. Haley once said, "You buying this house changed everything." But the truth was, it simply revealed who we were and who we could become. That was the power of healing, not in erasing the past, but transforming its grip on our future. If there was a moment when everything shifted, it was that evening by the fire pit at the lake house. I watched silently as family members processed the sight of Haley and me standing side by side. The quiet that followed her public apology was brief, soon replaced by whispers, raised eyebrows, and eventually, respect. That was just the beginning. In the week following Haley's apology and retraction of the bankruptcy claim, I quietly executed my next move. A true comeback isn't about vengeance. It's about reclaiming control. I reached out to a journalist who had once interviewed me for Entrepreneur magazine. I shared the story of a small business weathering a crisis with strategy and resilience. There was no mention of family drama, only a narrative of strength. The article ran under Startups Rebounding from Setbacks and featured new images of our upgraded facility. The response was overwhelming. Orders, partnership requests, and investor inquiries flooded my inbox. A sustainable interior brand proposed a joint line. A major European eco-retail chain wanted exclusive distribution rights. I'd flipped the script without ever addressing the drama. Meanwhile, Haley began changing too, but our family was skeptical. To shift their perception, I needed Haley to prove herself beyond words. So I proposed a joint financial literacy workshop for young women in our town. I'd cover entrepreneurship, Haley, image building, and smart spending. She hesitated. Aren't you afraid I'll mess it up? Of course, I said honestly. But without a chance, apologies mean nothing. The workshop attracted over 80 attendees. Haley ditched the designer look for a crisp white shirt and spoke with raw honesty. I spent to escape inadequacy. I bought things I didn't need to impress people who didn't. Afterward, a marketing student approached me. I believed the bankruptcy rumors, but today I saw the truth. That's why you have to tell your own story, I replied. Haley and I started appearing on podcasts, not to clear her name, but to share a real journey. Two sisters once trapped in toxic comparison, now finding individual voices. Even our family began to shift. Mom acknowledged the years of imbalance. Dad invited me to speak at his engineers club. Aunt Vivian, once pushing MLM pamphlets, now asked for retirement savings advice. Haley, for the first time, stopped measuring herself against me and started facing herself. Weeks later, I was invited back to New Haven University to speak at a women's entrepreneurship forum. I brought Haley. On stage, someone asked, would you choose to grow up without toxic sibling rivalry if you could? I paused. Without Haley, I might never have learned to draw boundaries or develop resilience. Pain taught me strength. Empathy began when I asked why she hurt me. After the talk, Haley whispered, you know what I respect most? You never struck back to tear me down, only to lift yourself up. Absolutely. It's the only way to break the cycle, I replied. She nodded. This wasn't just a win. It was the beginning. The lake house wasn't a revenge trophy. It was my turning point where I reclaimed my voice, dignity, and a sisterhood I thought was lost. Not with retaliation, but with a rebuild from the heart. If someone asks what a classy comeback looks like, I'll smile and point to myself. The woman who rewrote the script and invited her rival into a new role, partner. Some relatives approached afterward, expressing disbelief, others admiration. Uncle Robert, never one for long speeches, simply patted my shoulder and said, about time the truth got a microphone. In the weeks that followed, the lake house transformed into a sanctuary not only for me and Haley, but for our entire extended family. The children of our cousins played on the dock, Mom organized a family scrapbook project, Dad helped me install solar panels, proud to be part of a sustainable home vision. Haley stayed often, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. During our quiet evenings, we discussed finances, regrets, ambitions. We spoke not as adversaries, but as women who had survived each other and chosen to evolve. One rainy evening, as we watched the lake ripple through the storm, she asked, do you ever wish I hadn't made that announcement, that all this never happened? I considered the question. No, I answered truthfully. It hurt, yes, but it forced a change neither of us was brave enough to make on our own. She nodded. I think losing the image I built was the only way I could find who I actually am. In the fall, we co-authored an article titled Sisters, Scars, and Starting Over for a national women's magazine. It wasn't a tell-all, it was a tell-true. We didn't villainize each other. We explained how cycles of comparison are passed down, normalized, and how breaking them means facing yourself honestly. The article sparked conversations in schools, homes, podcasts. We were invited to speak at a women's leadership summit. When the host asked what success meant now, I answered, success isn't revenge or wealth. It's when you can stand beside the person who once tried to break you and say, we're both better now. By winter, the lake house had become tradition. Every season, we hosted reset weekends for women in business and leadership. Haley developed workshops on self-worth and conscious consumption. I mentored startups navigating failure. On New Year's Eve, surrounded by laughter and distant fireworks, Haley raised a glass to the year Morgan didn't just buy a house, she rebuilt a legacy. And I toasted back to the year we stopped being enemies in the same story and became co-authors instead. Forgiveness also came when I stopped waiting for a perfect apology and instead found satisfaction in quiet change. After the retreat last fall, Haley started her own brand, a minimalist, affordable clothing line inspired by the very wardrobe she once mocked. She called it Shift. I invested modestly, but not because she was my sister. I believed in the mission, less noise, more truth. She now lived within her means, tracked her spending, and had even started therapy. Not every day was perfect, some patterns returned in flashes, but she had learned to name them and redirect. That mattered more than a flawless record. For me, the business was flourishing. I'd opened a second office in Vermont, hired back every staff member I had once laid off, and initiated a mentorship fund for first-generation female founders. But the most surprising shift, I was happier. Not because Haley had changed, but because I no longer carried the emotional labor of our rivalry. Over brunch one Sunday, she asked, do you ever miss it? The drama, the tension, the adrenaline? I laughed. No, I miss the years we lost to it, but not the chaos. She toasted me with her orange juice. Then here's to peace, the real kind, the kind that's earned. Later that winter, I walked the frozen lake path alone. The sky stretched wide above me. The air was sharp and clean. I realized something simple yet powerful. The final chapter of our story wasn't really an end. That was just the first one we wrote together, not as adversaries, but as equals